Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ham, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios here in Morristown, New Jersey. If brands were symphonies, my guest today would rank as one of the world's legendary conductors. She's a consummate business strategist, trend analyst, marketing consultant, inveterate fixer, and passionate brand storyteller. She possesses boundless energy and grit. In her decades in marketing and trend forecasting, she's attracted an international following of global companies in search of her business acumen and the security of having her on their side, nurturing their brands. She is Pat Fiore. Pat, welcome.
Hi, Mike. So great to have a chance to talk to you.
It's so great. Yeah, of course. I mean, a mutual friend, Trevor Anderson, connected us, which I always love when people get connected to me through Trevor, because they always bring it and rock the episode that they're on. And in some initial conversations that you and I have had and learning more about you through my research and some stuff that you have sent over, I am super pumped about this episode. So I appreciate you coming on.
That's a lot of pressure, Mike.
It is. So I set the bar really high, and I'm sure you're just going to blow by it, which, you know, that's what happens. So first things first, I do have to comment on just the setup. So people that are listening to the audio of this can't actually see what you have going on in there, but it's all white. It looks super soft. I mean, it looks like you're in heaven in like that office you have there. It looks fantastic.
Yes.
But, yeah.
I'm a firm believer in Whiteboard. So for me to be creative, I need nothing distracting me. So my offices are always pure white. I do have some green walls behind me, as you'll see that.
Green wall.
Bounce off that. But all the furniture is white. My desk is white. Everything is simplistic so that my ideas can bounce off them. That's the way it works best for me.
And so this is like there's a purpose behind this then, right? So I mean, this is, yeah, because I remember meeting you the first time on Zoom and I was like, oh, wow, like, it, you know, she's got like a lot of white furniture, a lot of, you know, the chair is white, the couch is white, the pillows are white. I think there's like a bookshelf back there.
Yes, the bookshelf is white. The floor is white. The pillows are fur and leather and all very highly tactile, textural types of fabrics as well.
I love it. So there should be, so I'm not distracted. I'm locked in. I mean, granted, I am distracted because I just commented on it. But yeah, I get it. That's very interesting. I mean, obviously, you know, this may or may not be real behind me, but there's a lot of distractions back there. So hopefully I don't throw you off.
And then to my left, I'm looking at the ocean. So it's not a bad gig here, Mike, at all.
No. So, because you're calling in from Florida, right? That you're in Florida right now.
I live on Singer Island, which is West Palm Beach now, and partially my time in New Jersey because I'm a good old Jersey girl. For
right.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I walk the island every morning, and I walk between the ocean and the intercoastal.
Yeah, that's not a bad gig.
Not bad at all.
No, not a bad spot to be. So you got the white, you got the ocean. I'm here in the Spotlight Studios, which may or may not be my bedroom / gym / office / recording studio, but that's okay. You know, no ocean here, but you know, we're not too far from the Jersey Shore, so we can get down there anytime we want.
So one of the reasons for this, it may sound strange, but so many of my clients are from different parts of the world. So when I get a call, when I'm talking to the Italians who are ready to go and the arms are rolling and they're pacing while they're talking to me. You know, it's 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning because it's the middle of their day and they have to talk to me at that moment. And I'm talking to people in California, I'm on the phone at 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And all the other places in between, I'm in 12 to 14 to 24 hours difference in time. Korea, I'm a day behind, day ahead. In Australia, it's really tough. Yep. And what happens is I have to be void of time when I get on the phone with my clients because I never honestly know how long that conversation is going to go. Because sometimes a box will arrive with, you know, tons of stuff in it that they want me to look at, you know, 20 minutes before they call me.
Right.
So, you know, years ago when I would interview a new company to see if it was a, you know, good working opportunity, they would send me reflections of their world. But you should see my office. Honestly, it's like a Willy Wonka factory. I get things that probably should not be shipped anywhere, but I get them anyway.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it's like one of those when you bring it to the post office, they're like, "Oh, does this contain this?" And you're like, "Nope," and it definitely does for sure. Yeah.
Last week I got from Sri Lanka. I got some essential oils with a birch flavor that they want me to test. I already gave it to a chef who's actually completing that to test it to see if it's, you know, marketable in the US.
Right. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, we're teasing what it is that you do. So, I mean, I read the bio. We kind of talked a little bit at the beginning here. My audience probably doesn't know anything about Pat Fiore. So I gave him a little bit, and we were kind of, like I just said, hinting at some of the stuff that you do. So can you give us like a 30,000 foot view of what it is, like your background in business?
So I really expected that I would spend my life in fashion, and that was my direction. And I started as a young girl, winning contests for all kinds of crazy things I did, and making costumes for colleges and universities and schools and churches. Yeah, I'm talking designing them and making 75 costumes just for fun. So fashion was my direction. And then when I got into the fashion industry and I did really well, there was something that just didn't fully connect for me. The work was fun. The people were interesting. It's a challenging industry, but there was so much more behind it that I felt was not uncovered and not discussed. And so luckily I fell into the hands of ultimately to uh, a market research company that was doing trend work, predictory work on fashion, which in the 70s, that was a huge thing. I mean, the market was just starting to open up here. No one could predict anything. Everything was, it was just, you love it today, you hate it tomorrow. Short skirts, long skirts, it
Right.
varied from week to week. And there was a desperate need for companies investing in the fashion industry, especially in New York, to have some, safe ground, to know, to try to understand where the world was going and where consumer interest was and tastes and desires. There was no such information. The beauty world had a little bit of it, but not much. And so I found myself, asking more questions than the answers than getting the answers I was looking for. And that kind of drew me into a new direction. And that was really into analytics and data management and trying to understand what consumers really wanted. And when you're in Italy, that's relatively easy because most parts of Italy are pretty much on par, same with other countries. When it comes to America, and you swing from Maine to California, and everything in between, the Midwest, the Northwest, Southwest, tastes and interests are extremely different. And it's all based on exposure and experience and heritage.
Right.
And so I found myself in a world that really had not been uncovered yet. And it was really exciting.
Yeah, no, I think it's very interesting, and some of the stuff that you're doing now is like what would you call it? Like different new technologies,
So,
experiential technologies.
so I work in, because of my experience early in my career and because of a very strong, well developed, probably partially survival tactics, I have very intuitive skills. And I can connect the dots between industries mainly because I understand consumers. So I work in high trending, experiential, rare technologies, experiential industries and rare technologies. And that would be the fashion, flavor, food, fragrance, and unique technologies that are game changing and dynamic within relatively diverse industries.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's very, very interesting. We're going to get into that a little bit as we kind of progress through this episode. But um, we had discussed this right before we started recording, and this is one of the initial stories that you had told me about. You're talking about coast to coast, Maine to California, New Jersey to California. Trends are different, and like one of the things that you had, I guess, worked on, right, was stuff in denim and jeans. Like,
Yes.
so can you tell us a little bit about that and like kind of
Well,
give us a real world example of one of the projects that you worked on early on?
sure. I was working for RAM Report, Rome Arnold Marketing, and they basically had one of the first big setups of computer data collection and management for Coca-Cola at that time only. The wife of the owner and I had met. She had a fashion magazine that was pretty interesting, and she was doing some predictory work, pretty much, looking at the industry, looking at sales. She would collect data on sales of brands from around the country. And they, in exchange for taking that information and assembling it into some kind of report, which basically would say to May Company or Robinsons or Bloomingdale's, on the East Coast, jeans are selling for $39.95, and the West Coast is selling for $49.95. Da-da, that was it. And so I looked at that information and I said, okay, what kinds of jeans? Well, what does that mean? They're denim. No. Are they wide leg? Are they narrow leg? Are they four pocket? Do they have zippers? Do they have fly fronts? And then are they pre-washed or sand washed or acid washed? And she looked at me like, why do you need to know this? I said, well, how can you possibly predict where an industry is going without knowing, and especially fashion, without style cues?
Right.
So she looked at me kind of funny and said, okay, what do you think you can do with this? And so what I went off to do is I hired 16 students from Parsons and FIT, trained them to be able to hold denim in their hands and know how it was made, and look at style cues and record them in a certain way, so that when the sales information arrived at the office in Chicago to fed into the computers, we matched that by style number and by brand with the style cues. So now the report said, denim was selling at $49.95, and it was wide leg, and it was acid washed, and it was light blue, and on and on.
Right.
Now my predictory work was way better for the clients, and so things started to swell very quickly with companies wanting to pay for these reports. Certain amount of them proprietary, certain amount of them were published in Women's Wear Daily and published in the Ram magazine. But it opened so many doors for me, because I was very young. I became this really, and I had started out designing children's wear for a very short time, and then fell into this opportunity. It gave me such a chance to meet people that I never would have met. So, the paralysis and the Halstons of the world and the DVFs and the Gloria Vanderbilts really wanted to talk to me. And I didn't think I really had much to say except what I was doing, but it really did change the dynamic direction of my career.
Yeah. What I found interesting, because we had talked about that the first time we ever talked. You had told me that story, which I found interesting, and that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. But then as we were kind of, thinking about what we wanted to discuss over the course of the episode, you told me that I wanted to see how maybe that could apply to other industries. But you said that now, that was basically like a pioneer moment, because it seems as though not a lot of people, or really nobody, was doing it back then. And then you're just like, hey, what about this? And people are looking at you like you got 8 heads. Like, why would you need all this information? So what I find fascinating is that nobody had really done that prior to that. Really looked at data. You know what I mean? I think that is part of, trend analysis, marketing. I mean, you got to look at data, right?
Data didn't exist freely. I mean, there were big companies like DuPont and Kaiser and, big, large brands that were trying to do their own research. But for the most part, they were, resorted to things like focus groups or surveys to limited mailings. They didn't have email then. You didn't have Survey Monkey. You didn't have the broad sweeping opportunity to gather people, of like mind or age or demographics or psychographics, or geographics. So really very difficult to do and do any predictory work from it. So it was an enlightening moment for everyone. It was very exciting. And as a result of that, my kind of wild career of doing, produced the first Jordache commercial, Sergio Valente, jeans, Yves Saint Laurent, Gloria Vanderbilt. I mean, all of a sudden I became like the queen of jeans, because it started in the denim business with this, predictory work.
Right.
And everyone thought that I kind of knew something no one else did. And I kind of knew what to do with information no one asked for. That was basically it.
Right.
And then I was hired by DuPont, and that was a wild ride as well. So
yeah. So I guess one of the questions that I would have is, when you're going through this process and you're, asking for the information and then basically taking these students, training them to do different things, was there like a reason why you asked for like specific things, or you're just trying to acquire as much data as you could? I mean, obviously there had to be a system in place, right? So it was just kind of a make it up as you go, or like you had an idea in your head and you're like, hey, let's try this.
Now, I knew fashion pretty well at a young age, and I was always looking at fashion cues and direction and new style trends. And so when it came to the denim business, which exploded in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, there were iconic style trends, style guides, and we wanted to capture all of that. So I made a master list of all the potential different denim styles there were for men, for women, for kids. And then they became the cues that we captured. So there was a definite plan for it. But, I had been working in fashion. I had been designing. I was writing for Condé Nast at that time. When I was a kid, I was writing for 17 magazine and co-ed. So I was always kind of fashion focused.
Right.
And I knew a lot about it already, but one of the things with me as a person is I never stop asking questions. I drive everyone crazy with that. I dig a lot deeper than most people do. My clients can love or hate me, but at the end of the day, the questions have a reason and a purpose. And I never just accept things kind of as I see them. So asking the questions, training these young people was really great because they were all fashion design students
Right.
and merchandising students, but they had not, unlike myself, had not grown up with families that were, fashion focused. My family worked in factories. My mother in a pajama factory, my grandfather, the first Stetson hat factory. So they all worked in factories, and I knew just instinctively learned a lot as a young girl. So I could apply a lot of that to the work I was doing.
Right. And I think that's a good segue because, you talk about how, you don't just accept things at face value. And some of the other stories that you had told me the first time we talked was about how you would basically go to the farms, to the factories, talk to the actual people that were putting these products together or growing different things and all that kind of stuff. So why? why would you do that kind of stuff? Whereas everyone is kind of like operating kind of in the corporate arena and you're going like down to the nitty gritty where things are actually, being made or being grown or whatever. So talk to me about maybe what the impetus was behind that.
Well, having grown up with as a kind of a factory brat, I knew the things that my family knew that some of their bosses didn't know. And I also knew that, you have 100 people working in a factory, not everyone feels valued. And yet they may make amazing contributions to the progress and growth of a company just with the one piece of what they do, no matter where they are on the assembly line. And I learned that because my father owned factories, and aside from working in them, he owned several, and he treated his people very differently than I remember seeing people being treated. So I'm a firm believer that things don't happen by accident in development of product, whether it be working with a biochemist or a PhD or a seamstress or a flavorist or a perfumer. They are very intensely skilled at what they do. I, as a marketing person, have no idea how they got there. But I will know if it has value in the market or not. I think bringing those two things together makes great sense. So when I started working for DuPont, when they hired me away from RAM, my first job for them was to go around the world and observe fashion. So they drop kicked me in like 10 different countries and about 25 cities in the US. And my job was to walk around where fashion would be seen and see what people were wearing and come back and tell them. It wasn't enough for me. So I said to them, when they were having difficulty, they launched Lycra very unsuccessfully the first time out because they made assumptions. And they made assumptions that women would accept the value of what they were presenting. And unfortunately, a woman who looks at a bathing suit that is supposed that they wear a size 8 and the suit looks like a size 2 because in fact it does stretch, but they've never had stretch on their body before, has no understanding of how to relate to that.
Right.
So they said, we have to get this right. And I said, okay, so I'm going to go to the factories. And they said, what for? I said, I want to go spend some time down in North Carolina. Give me 2 weeks. And I went down to North Carolina and I worked in dyeing. I worked in cutting on the cutting boards. I worked cutting tables. I worked in packing and in labeling and in shipping. So now everyone was wondering what the hell I was doing there, because I had no experience. But I just wanted to get to know the people. And about halfway through my visit, it became clear to me that the fact that the machines were snapping the Lycra, it wasn't working, it wasn't weaving well. I knew there had to be some kind of control over that. I mean, the people that work there, they know their machines, they know what the capability is. So I kept questioning in a kind way, I brought cookies in every day. I brought flowers in. I treated them nicely because my family were all factory workers.
Right.
And one day when I questioned why it's not working on behalf of DuPont, this old guy, Henry, said to me, come here, Pat. And he dragged me back to a locker and way in the back of the factory. And he opened the locker and he took out of it samples that were of what DuPont was waiting for. That was absolute perfection. When I say perfection, what they've been waiting for about a year and a half to see come off. And I said to him, why? And he said, they never really asked me. And so from that point forward, I really got it in a very personal way. So whenever someone talks to me about helping them with their brand or their products, the first thing I say, years ago, I tell them to send me a box of everything that could give me a clear picture of what they do. Shortly into my career, I realized I had to be on the road. And believe me when I tell you, I've been on the road my entire career until COVID hit. My last trip was 2 years ago, February. I was in Catania, which is a suburb of Sicily, for the harvesting season of blood orange, which has great healing powers. It's not really a fruit that you would eat, though you would eat a regular orange, but it has immense healing powers. And that company hired me to help them write a grant for the Italian government to get enough money to come to the US to start their business. And I believed in the company and the ingredients that they make from these blood orange and artichoke leaves and such, that we raised that money. And unfortunately, COVID hit, so they haven't launched yet, but they're about to launch. So.
Right. Interesting. So when I'm listening to this, one of the questions that I would have is, so you're working with DuPont and they're sending you to like all over the world, basically to observe fashion and acquire information. And I would assume do some of the things maybe that you were doing prior when you were trying to like get that information when you were in the denim business, like maybe trying to recreate the wheel, I guess, for lack of a better word. But it wasn't enough. So did you ever get any pushback, I guess, like, hey, we're sending you all over the world to figure this out. Why can't you just why are you going to North Carolina to go to the factory? Was there any
the answers are not on the street, Mike,
Right.
And I wasn't engaging talking to everyone that I met. And what I felt is I needed to talk to the people that they were birthing this product.
Right.
I felt that they were the best place for me to start. And I didn't start there, but that's where I wound up, a couple months later. And that's where we got our answers. When it comes to American consumers' attitudes and behaviors, that's been one of the really important values I bring to my clients. I understand it. I mean, I've been writing reports now for months on what's going to happen post-COVID, purchasing preferences, attitudes and behaviors that will shift, things that have shifted away and will never change again, never come back to what we knew before. I think before a company starts to develop a brand, or before they spend the money they would have to spend to launch a brand and to fully develop a product, they really need to start with the audience, who their target is, what their competition is doing, of course, but also really understand that audience, how they think, how they behave, what they dream about, what their aspirations are, what their frustrations are, how they live. And without knowing that, I don't know how you create products that have any, strength and longevity in the market.
Right.
This is a country that has enough product for 4 times as many people as live here. So, there's a lot of competition no matter what industry you're in.
Yep. Right. You really got to nail it. Right. So,
you really do.
Yeah. So one of the things, this is tying together so perfectly, so I'm pumped about it. So one of the things that we had talked about early was that, when you were doing the denim stuff and acquiring that information and gathering the information and figuring out trends and all that kind of stuff, that was a new thing, like relatively new. I mean, people had tried to do it, but maybe not at the level that you were doing it. But fast forward to 2021, and right before we started, I think, recording, we had talked about how I mean, there's just so much information, so much data that
Yeah.
companies can get their hands on fairly easily. I think you said spend a couple dollars and you'll get more information than you probably know what to do with. Is there such a thing as too much information?
Well, I do think there's too much information. I do think it's not all from really um, legitimate sources. I think there's a lot of information out there that hasn't been vetted, that hasn't been gathered well. And I also think there are a lot of voices out there today that we never had in the conversation. So one of the challenges, I mean, I would talk to startups all the time that have great, interesting ideas and great ambition, but they haven't done their homework as far as they're such believers and they're so excited that they think they can just run over everyone else in that segment. No problem. Mine's so much better, and theirs may be much better,
Yeah.
but they probably don't have the money to compete. They certainly have the money to perfect. And so how do you possibly do the right kind of job in helping them? I don't just take on anyone. I really don't. When I think a product has potential, I will do my best to make sure they have all the information they need. And then we really have vetted the market and that identified an audience that's really primary for them. And there's a way to get to them without having to step over brands spending millions and millions of dollars that already have that audience kind of captured.
Right.
I think that it's very different today than it was years ago. Years ago, we had nowhere to go to get information except to hire a research company to do it. And I remember working on a project with J&J about 30 years ago, and they spent $1 million on the research, running from city to city to city, doing focus groups everywhere. It's highly expensive and very valuable, but also think about a J&J that has the deep pockets to be able to spend what they need to spend to get into the market and stay on top of the market. Not everyone has those kinds of budgets to work with.
Right. Yeah. So talk to me also about could there be like a paralysis by analysis type thing? Like, do people like get this information and then just not know what to do with it? I mean, there's one thing to spend $1 million on this information, but there's another thing to be like, okay, we have all this info, all this data, all these analytics. This is how we're going to attack the next phase of our plan here.
Well, there are subtleties in information. First of all, you have to ask the right questions to get the answers you really need. I think that's part of the problem always is have we asked the challenging questions? We just finished a survey for a very large franchise company. And we did both internal and external, and prospects. And impressions can be very different. I mean, my expectation going into it was that external would have enough exposure to have an opinion, not necessarily true. And internal would have maybe more management perspective, but not necessarily predictory on what the consumer, their ultimate customer, would want. It was very different, and we learned a lot, that was really valuable. But you have to spend the time to dig properly. You have to ask the right questions, and they have to be not so broad that you're going to get a kind of a plain vanilla response.
Right.
You really have to dig deep enough to get the kind of response that's going to help trigger change and better direction.
Right. So, and then also going off with this data stuff, and forgive me because I just find this so interesting. We've talked about this a couple times on the show with other marketing people, how, different marketing people look at analytics more. Other people just do like the creative side of marketing more. Other people try to do both. So I feel like, with when I'm talking to you, it's not necessarily like a marketing agency, right? Because that was you said that early before we started recording, like that was just kind of the box that you fell in, even though you're not really a marketing agency, right? That's true, correct?
Well, we're probably more marketing than we are advertising, but honestly and truly, I never felt comfortable in that box because I think that box is about the creative side, and that I love that side, and I have kind of a blend of both left and right brain. But I always still had questions, and to me, the questions need to be answered before the brand development and design goes forward.
Right. Yeah. So the other thing too that I wanted to ask, and this is one of the things that I had put in those topics of conversation that I wanted to chat about, was we're talking a lot about analytics. And then also we're talking a lot about you actually getting your hands dirty, going to these factories, going to these farms.
Right.
And it's one thing to talk to, a guy working on an assembly line. It's another thing to have like all this data. So talk to me about how you marry those two things, because I feel like one could be fairly objective, the other fairly subjective, maybe, varying levels depending on who you talk to, what the information is, the person that you're talking to. So talk to me about trying to manage those together. Like, how do you do that?
Well, information is important, but contact and connectivity to me is just as important, if not more. So, I can tell you that I learned things. We worked, and I can give you a variety of projects, but my time, we were working with a young fifth generation farmer in Arkansas. And he, as the fifth generation of his family, went to college to get a degree in science to figure out what to do with the leftover chicken litter and do something productive with it. And he did actually convert it into organic fertilizer. He had plenty of data, but I found that I learned more with him and from him by spending time in Arkansas on those chicken farms.
Right.
The level of frustration, the level of challenge, the level of the lack of ability to have control over the damage that it was doing to their land and to their waters was something you really had to experience. And I was able to experience that. And for that, and because of that, I was able to have conversations with the Tysons of the world that were way more productive for them than it would have been had I not had that experience. And I can tell you that, I spend more time on farms and in fields and in factories and in labs than I do at the conference table, and that's a lot. And I learn more. And once I feel it and see it and experience it, I'm much more not just compassionate, but much more passionate about the project. So it helps me to really know where the subtleties lie, where the challenges might arise, and also to intimately understand the value of what these people have created, what it took to do it, and what it's going to mean to the world. And so
Right.
I've been heavily involved in sustainability for years, and I'll give you a good example. I have a client in the mint business who had been in the mint business for 40, 50 years. He's retired now and sold his company to a very large company. But I went out to ride with him in the truck and go from one farm to another out in Washington State. And he brought me to this greenhouse that he had, and he had been developing hybrids for over those 40 years, taking a mint leaf from Wisconsin and a mint leaf in India and crossing them and creating something that with a scent and a flavor that didn't exist.
Right.
And he had over 250 of them. And they were there proudly for anyone that came to visit, and big companies came to walk in and look and see and smell and taste. I said to him, "Oh, no, no, no. You're going to put barbed wire around this. No one's getting in here.
Yeah.
You're not letting anyone in here unless you have an opportunity with them that's going to make sense to you, not only financially, but morally, logistically."
Sure. Yeah.
Because I knew his passion for what he was doing for 40 years had value. And he himself didn't even place the level of value on it that it deserved because it was intuitive and instinctive for him, and it was multiple generations of doing this work. So I understood its value, and we did. Next time I went, this was enclosed and it was locked,
Yeah.
so no one got to walk through there.
Yeah.
So those are the kinds of things that even the people who are creating, they're looking to please, but they don't know the business world and what can happen from that.
Right.
So I really look to help them not only perform and build, but also to protect.
Oh, of course. And so I would also imagine that because you're so hands-on on like the actual company side, like you said, you spend more time factories, farms, places like that than you do on the actual conference table. And so I would imagine that when you do have the data that you are obviously looking at, because I feel like you have to, and then you bring that back to that startup, that back to that farm, back to that factory, back to wherever, you've established trust, right? I mean, I think they're going to be more receptive to what you have to say, rather than them hiring a marketing agency that's just going to sit in New York City and be like, hey, do this, something like that, right?
Well, it's a deep trust, and it's interesting because I really wind up getting to know them on a level that's quite different. And oftentimes companies, leaders, people who develop these brilliant ideas don't have an end game in mind. They know it's good. They haven't necessarily studied the market to the extent to know how good it is. And it's not a selfish thing. They're not doing it as a corporate mandate. They're doing it from their heart, and they're doing it from their experience and their talent. And I want them to not only be protected, but to acknowledge the fact that everyone that's working with them is part of that process, and it deserves to be honored. And it deserves to be honored in a way that brings them not just monetary value, but the heritage and legacy value that they deserve, because most of these people have spent their lives and several generations doing this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it means a lot to me. And I can tell you that comes from my upbringing, my family heritage, the history of my family, which I won't go into, but a lot of that comes from that. So my grandfather worked in the first Stetson hat factory in New Jersey, which is, who would ever think, right?
Didn't know that.
So about 10, 12 years into my business, we were working with CIT, and we came up with an interesting idea for them. They were working with lending, CIT Industrial Lending Division, talking to big factories about startups and building out. And they wanted to make a deal, put a marketing program together. And my creative director came up with this incredible idea. And it basically was a 3-part mailing. At that time, you physically mail things. And part of it was, if you let our salespeople in to talk to you, we will measure your head with this tape measure. We will bring you a handmade Stetson hat, custom handmade Stetson hat. Now, what man do you know wouldn't want to walk around with a cowboy hat on for a few minutes?
I mean, I'll drive there right now. I'll get myself a hat.
I mean, I got one from my dad, my uncles, and my husband. But what was really funny is that Stetson wasn't entertaining the idea in Texas. The conversation wasn't happening. So I called them and said, I have something I bet you would love to see. I have the original foam wood head that the steam came through to stretch the felt over.
Yeah.
I have a picture of my grandfather working in that original Stetson hat factory. Would you like to see that? And they were like, what? I flew to Texas. I brought the picture. I brought the head that we had sitting in our kitchen all the time. And we made the deal. And it was the very most productive, most successful direct mail campaign that CIT ever did. Brought them millions upon millions of dollars in lending for industrial development. Yeah. So, that how would that have ever happened? It wouldn't have happened.
No. That's so interesting. I want a hat now. I'm gonna go out and buy it. I'm going to go out and buy a hat. So is that something that you think maybe is lost nowadays? Because I think maybe if everything's so, digital, it's online. I mean, obviously the past year and a half, notwithstanding because of COVID and having to do stuff virtual, but being able to also do stuff like this, where we've developed a personal connection, but through Zoom calls. But do you think that the personal side of it, the human interaction side of it, do you think that's sometimes lost nowadays and people are just so focused on data analytics and all that, where they kind of lose what you're talking about?
I really do. And I have to tell you that from my perspective, having been in all but 4 states in the US and so many countries around the world, and had these amazing experiences, that for me, it's really discouraging not to have those. Right. So I do the best I can to still have them. My plan is to go back to Sicily very soon and have that experience again. But that it's eye-opening, and it's a revelation every time I do it. I find out things I never would have known to ask or expect to learn, and that feeds my team to create messaging and brand positioning and campaigns that not only look smart and look incredibly good, but are effective in the market, which is why I think we've had great success over so many years.
Right. I think that it just kind of transcends time. You know what I mean? Because I think that because you've been in this business for a long time, you've been able to kind of adapt and keep up with different trends and all that kind of stuff, and keep yourself at the forefront of companies' minds, I guess, for lack of a better word. Just because that's something that is always going to be, for lack. I mean, granted, this is a very cliche given the fact that we're talking about fashion and all that. It's always going to be in style to be able to have human interactions. People are always going to appreciate that more than just getting a printout with a bunch of data and what they should do on the bottom of it. You know what I mean?
Right. One of the things that worries me about the young generation today is that they don't have that, and their intuitive skills, their reading body language, understanding when someone truly believes and doesn't believe, trusts and doesn't trust, it's a word, but it's an emotional connectivity that you don't get when you don't have that human interaction.
Right. Yeah.
Listen, by the time I left DuPont, that 2-week period I was down in North Carolina, people were bringing me turnips from their garden and zucchinis that were so big I could hardly, it was embarrassing to carry them to the airport. But I also made myself available to them in a way that they would open the door for me. And that is, I used to go down there in leather pants and black leather skirts and boots, and they would look at me like, what? And so the conversation didn't happen.
Right.
And so what I had to do, and one of my boss was very young, he said, Pat, you look great in New York. It's not happening in North Carolina. I had to buy myself pink pants and a pink skirt, and had to really change my style and not to undermine them in any way, but to connect with them in a way that they would start to get comfortable and then listen. Right. And then get,
Yeah. So because like we've talked a lot about a lot of different stuff, and this has been just as good of an episode as I possibly could have hoped for so far. Of course. So do you, you obviously you have a business still. Fiore Inspires is the business, right? Yeah. And so do you set goals for yourself? Like you're still trying to onboard clients and all that kind of stuff as you progress, because like we always like to talk about goals on this show. That is one of the questions I usually ask at some point over the course of the whole episode. So do you have goals that you have set for yourself even over like the next year or so?
That's interesting. I always have goals, Mike, but I'm also a little bit of a dreamer. So, what I find is what's hard for me right now is I don't have the interaction. And to me, great ideas and great opportunities come from interaction. I spent so much of my time wandering and searching and sailing through the world that business just came to me.
Right.
We have business. I'm not looking to onboard a lot of anything that is kind of common. I'm not looking to onboard new clients that don't have something really amazing to talk about and who don't have that level of commitment to what they're doing that I would give it if I'm going to take it on. So, that Trevor and I are working on some projects together. I'm doing a lot of vetting of young startup businesses, and so and a lot of them need a lot of work yet. But I'm also working more advisory with companies that really need someone to stand back and objectively look at what they're doing, successful or not successful, and help them figure out how to get to the next level and continue to grow. And sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. Getting started is one thing. Keep going is a whole other perspective. So I don't know, that I have a deck of cards, right?
Deck of cards? I don't think so.
I have a deck of 24 cards. When I sit down in an advisory capacity with a company, I spread the little cards that I've created that have, I'll call them the tough questions in them.
Okay.
I spread them out in front of the 5 or 6 or 10 people in the C-suite and say, pick a card, read it out loud, and give me the answer. And so it's really fun.
Yeah.
It really works. And I think it also makes everyone really think deeper and realize that if no one's challenging them and they're not necessarily challenging themselves in a new way, things will keep going the way they're going, successful or not successful. At some point, that stops.
Right.
So the tough questions are the good ones to see and to read and to answer.
Can you give us an example of a tough question, or is that a Fiore secret?
No. I mean, some of them are a secret. What do
The
you, what do
really
you,
tough ones are secrets.
what do you, an easy one, what do you do to inspire the people that are most valuable to you?
Yeah.
And, people think the answer to that is giving them more money, giving them a raise, giving them an extra vacation. That's not what really works to that extent. It's a temporary kindness. And it's kind of self-fulfilling.
Yeah.
To me, if you know the people that work for you and you know what makes them tick, you know the things and you give them things to inspire them to get not only better at their job, but have a better life. So I think it's a very different kind of question. And not everyone really can rise to that one.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I have come to admire in the basically 2 hours total that we've talked together outside of just emails back and forth, is just that, like, it just seems that you're kind of always looking at things like a little bit differently. And that's one of the things that I really like, is that there's always the people that just kind of sit in the box, and then you use everything at your disposal to kind of think outside the box. So it's in the box in a sense where you're data driven to a certain degree, but you're also human driven. So it kind of marries those two things really well together. And I think that's one of the things that I think I've noticed, which is probably why you've been so successful over your years in business.
Mike, for me, it's more about learning and listening than it is about teaching. So I find people fascinating, and they open up for some reason. Maybe I have that kind of face that people want to tell me things.
A trusting
think,
face,
no,
a very trusting face.
maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's the curiosity, because I think I'm terribly curious, and there's not anything that I don't want to learn more about. I think I'm just always thirsty for more, thirsty for knowledge. And somehow the most bizarre conversations trigger something in me to connect to something else I'm working on, or something else that I think could make a difference for them. So
Right.
I have
Yeah.
this expanded. My husband will often say to me, "Don't you get tired of learning new things?"
No.
No. Well, why is that interesting to you? I'd say, well, it's new.
Yeah.
I think it has some value in the world, and I think it can make a difference in this way, in that way. I don't know what drives me to that. I think, when I was very young, I had such a wildly huge family. I'm Italian. I mean, there's just no end to the family.
Right.
I'm one of 18. I'm the oldest of 18 children on one side and 21 on the other. And I have, just in Canada alone, I have 47 second, third, and fourth cousins, just in Montreal, by the way.
Right.
So it just doesn't, it goes on, and everyone does something different. We're not all doing the same things. So I find I want to know what they're learning. I want to know how they're learning. I want to know if they can learn more. And I want to make sure that I can mentor in any way that I can. So the more I learn, the more I can give.
Right. Yeah, and that's one of the things, it's one of many things that I think that I connect with very well with you, just because, like, that's why I do this, and that's why I have so many different kinds of people on the show, like different walks of life, different backgrounds, different careers, different whatever, because you just, like, you ask them questions, you just learn something new about. Today I have, I'm recording with you, and I'm recording with two other people that are just totally not even in the same stratosphere as what we just talked about over the last hour. But I'm just so excited because I get to learn all these different things over the course of the day from different people, from three different people. You have these,
I'm sure that's it, Mike. I'm sure that's it. It's got to be a thirst for knowledge. On one of my walks, about 3 months ago, I met someone that I just said to her, she had a little puppy, and we kind of admired it, and we just chatted for a minute. I see her almost every day. And I said, what do you do? And she told me, and I was blown away. And from what she does, I was able to connect it to someone that I'm currently, connected to. You probably have seen her. She's the woman who is a perfumer who's helping people post-COVID regain their sense of taste and smell.
Yeah.
Phillips. I talked to her shortly before I spoke to you.
Yeah.
Now I'm connecting her to this woman that I met who's doing some amazing, she's a scientist, amazing research. And the two of them, I think, are going to something wonderful might happen.
Yeah,
So it probably won't require any marketing, but you know what? Something's going to come from that that's going to change the world. So
exactly.
for me, that's enough. That's a great day's work, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And then it's just like you never know. Like all these people that you meet and all these, different connections that you make and all that kind of stuff. Maybe it leads to business down the road, but is that really the end game for everything? You know what I mean? Like if you're able to, connect people that can do something good in the world, isn't that even better than just bigger than all of us type of thing? I think that that's just really
Absolutely.
cool. Yeah.
And so often people don't want to share that big idea because they
Right.
don't want to sound foolish. They're nowhere near it, and
Yeah.
it could be such a far stretching dream, but they seem to find me, Mike, and I hear the stories, and not everything is totally valuable to the world, but many things are. That's why we've worked at the cutting edge of, rare and raw ingredients and essential oils and really some beautiful new opportunities that are really exciting. And I do really think that I think people need to listen more,
Right.
to learn more and learn more than do something with it. So.
Yeah. No, I mean, this has been awesome. And I'm sure we could probably talk we've been talking for almost an hour. Did you even know that? Because
No, I didn't.
it's
Wow, I
3 o'clock recording time, but this is the morning because it's the morning spotlight. So we could probably talk for another couple hours, I'm sure. But for the sake of everyone listening, we're going to move this into our closing segment, which we call Under the Spotlight. So the spotlighters, which is what I call my audience, have been listening to us talk, like I said, for almost an hour. So what is one thing that you would want them to walk away from this episode with? So you are under the spotlight.
I would say never forget the people behind the scene. I think that we often look at what's right in front of you and has value and merit, but somehow it got there through the toil and struggles and brilliance of people behind it. I think the people behind the scene are so important. And imagine if we inspired them, how much more they could create for this world,
Right.
how much better the world could be as a result. So I get that's just off the top of my head. I didn't prepare for that. So
I like to do it as like
I know
real
you
and
do.
as authentic as possible. So, but I appreciate that was awesome because I think that's a big part of, I mean, your MO. I think, is like to recognize the people behind the scenes and how you can all work together to try to make something great, So I think that was perfect. So if people have been listening to this episode and they're like, oh my God, I need to talk to Pat. Like I need more Pat. So where can they go to get that?
Well, they can call me. I'm good with that. They can email me. You have my email address. Do you
Yep.
want me to repeat it or?
No, I'll put the email address right in the show notes.
I mean, email me. I'm open to take emails from anyone that has a question for me. It may sound like a crazy thing to do, and that's why I have a million emails every day.
Right.
But as long as they're willing to listen, I'm willing to listen. And as long as they're willing to listen to accept my gut instinct on my opinion, then I'm certainly willing to give it. So.
Absolutely. Love that. And that just perfectly wraps up this episode. I will also put my contact information, themorningspotlight@gmail.com and the website, themorningspotlight.com. If for some reason you are so intimidated by Pat and you want to go through me to get to her, that's fine too. I'll be happy to make that
Am I
introduction.
intimidating?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But be happy to make that introduction. If you do want to connect with me and to get to Pat, that would be fine as well. Pat, thank you so much for coming on with us today. This was, as expected, a dynamite episode.
Thank you so much, Mike. Your questions are great, and I really enjoyed it.
Of course, me too. Absolutely. And the Spotlighters, thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.